Good evening. Welcome to the Jacob Hornberger Show. I'm Jacob Hornberger, and this is my weekly internet show. Great to be back with y'all. I thought I'd talk a little bit tonight about the hurricane and the elections and about libertarianism in general, because I think they all have valuable lessons for us in terms of where we're going as a country. Probably one of the best examples of how different libertarians see the world from the statists has occurred with the hurricane. Hurricane Sandy, there's wreaked this unbelievable devastation on New York, New Jersey. And immediately the statists are coming out in full force. They always do this whenever there's some big crisis or something. You say, well, this proves that we need big government, they're telling us, what better evidence of the need for big government than FEMA and the fantastic job that FEMA does to take care of people and so forth. Well, of course, that's what they always focus on. They focus on the government action that addresses some kind of crisis, and they never focus on the unseen consequences of government action. For one thing, let's get one thing clear. FEMA is not charity. It's not charity in the sense that we know about charity in the Bible. It's not charity in the sense that we know things ethically speaking. This is all founded on force. Any money that the government gives to people that have been hurt by this hurricane has been taken by force. I mean, suppose I, for example, go out and accost a person on the street and say, there's hurricane victims. Would you donate to help them out? And they say, no. We're struggling right now. We can't afford it. And I just held them up and said, well, tough. These people are suffering. Now, go to the ATM, and I force them to go out and take $1,000 out. So they've now made $1,000 donation. Well, am I a good person for doing that? Are they a good person for doing that? Well, I think every statist in the world would say, well, no, Jacob, that you're just a thief, There's no charity there. And I say, well, wait a minute. I used the money to help out these people and gave it all to the hurricane victims. I didn't even keep a dime for myself. Well, the statists would say, and rightfully so, tough luck. You're a thief. You're going to jail. And they would have me prosecuted for doing that. Well, but all of a sudden, the government does it, which is really just a group of people that's voting, that says we're going to vote to take that person's $1,000 and we're going to send it over to this person over here. And it's all by force. I mean, that's what the Internal Revenue Service is all about. They come after you if you don't pay your taxes. And they come after you with the force of government. Liens on your house, they foreclose on your house, they use marshals to throw you out of your house. If you resist with force, they will meet force with force, and you may very well die. They'll call it resisting arrest, but ultimately, that's what government taxation and redistribution of wealth is based on, force. And what the statist says, well, yeah, but it's democracy, Jacob, and we believe in democracy. Well, it's interesting because in the Constitution, there's not one single solitary word about democracy. Nothing. And why is that? Well, it's because our ancestors feared democracy. That's why the Bill of Rights, which really doesn't give rights at all, contrary to what the statists tell us and inculcate in children in the public government schools, the Bill of Rights doesn't give rights. It should have been called a Bill of Prohibitions. It protects people's pre-existing rights from infringement by government, and it, even if that government's democratically elected. In other words, suppose the democracy that statists love so much, voted that everybody's got to go to church on Sundays, and they said, well, religion's important. We got to inculcate these values both in children and adults, and so what's an hour out of your week? No big deal. And well, I think even the statists would say, well, we don't want democracy going that far. We want a limitation on democracy. Well, it's no different on what a person does with his money. I mean, you see, that's the moral blind spot that statists have. They cannot see that what a person does with his money is as important as what he does on Sunday or all the rest of the days of the week. This reflects his values, what he considers important. And you can see the outpouring of support for the Red Cross in this thing. And imagine, you see, this is another thing statists don't think about. Imagine if there had been no income tax. You see, what funds the welfare warfare state? Okay, that's one thing, very rarely do statists talk about. Because they want to create this sense of, oh, it's a cost-free enterprise. The government's a player in the marketplace. It's out there creating jobs and contributing to the prosperity of the country, and it's all just one harmonious family where you got private sector employers and businesses, and you've got the public sector employer and businesses, and everybody's contributing to the prosperity of the country. That's just a myth. It's a delusion. The government sector is the parasitic sector. It lives off the private sector. So when you've got all this giant military, you got all the giant bureaucracies and so forth, they're having to extract wealth from the private sector in order to, fund the public sector, including the recipients of all the doles that the government passes out, including all this FEMA assistance and so forth. That's, of course, what the income tax is all about. It's what the payroll tax is all about, funding Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, support of dictatorships. I mean, all the things that the empire does, the welfare state does, the drug war. This is the income tax and the payroll tax. That's a large amount of money. And so think about this. Just imagine that 22 years ago, when the Future of Freedom Foundation was founded, and we published some articles that first year, 1990, calling for the elimination of the income tax. Now, suppose Americans had listened to us back then, okay? Eliminated all welfare state programs, dismantled the standing army, the military-industrial complex. The Cold War had ended. Suppose you just repeal the National Security Act of 1947, no more CIA, no more giant military, no more overseas bases, domestic bases, all this militarization. They were relied essentially on citizen soldiers, given that there's absolutely no possibility, reasonable possibility, that any country has a military capability of invading this country or occupying it. And then dismantle all the welfare state programs. In other words, dismantle the things that the income tax funds and leave people free to keep everything they earn. Well, that shocks people. Oh my gosh, Jacob, how would we live without an income tax? Well, Americans live without an income tax for more than 100 years. Now, that's part of our libertarian heritage. So when people say it's impossible, it can't be done, it was done. It's not impossible because it was done. Our ancestors said no taxation on income. Now, they also said no welfare state, no warfare state, too. And so you have this gigantic private sector that wasn't giving up wealth to the government because there was no income tax and no payroll tax. And then everything had to be done through the unhampered market economy, unhampered by government rules and regulations and domination and control. The government didn't have very much money. It was getting its money from tariffs. And so people kept everything they earned. Now, suppose we had prevailed in 1989, when we first got started, and Americans had listened to us and said, okay, we're going to dismantle this giant socialist imperialist mess. It's a cancer. I mean, that's really what it is. It's a cancer on the body politic. And let's say everybody had said, okay, Jacob, we're going with it. We're going to dismantle this thing. Now, let's say, just hypothetically, everybody pays different amounts of taxes, but let's just say hypothetically that the average family or person, let's just say person, pays $25,000 a year in income taxes. Okay? Now, what would that amount to today? I mean, let's say that the income tax had been repealed in 1989, and people have been paying $25,000 a year. How much would a person have in his bank account or under his mattress or invested or whatever? He'd have $550,000. Now, let's add another $50,000 there for compound interest. That's $600,000. Now, you see, this is what the statists never want to talk about. That the engine of taxation that funds the welfare warfare state, that, they say, oh, but look how good we are with FEMA, and look how good we are with the world, and with the dictators that we send foreign aid to. I mean, look how good we are. They have taken out of the average person, $25,000 a year in taxes, the sum of about $600,000 that he'd be sitting with today. Imagine if those people suffering from the hurricane right now had $600,000 in their bank account. And even if you reduce that to $10,000 a year, let's say a person pays only 10 grand a year in income taxes. What's that? It's still about $250,000. That's a considerable amount of money to pay insurance premiums for health care, or to cover your own health care bills, to take, handle your own retirement. It's a nice little nest egg, right? Well, this is what they don't show you. And by the way, it's also a nice accumulated amount of wealth that people can donate part of, that people are in need. So like when you see these people suffering in different parts of the world or whatever, you think, well, should I give to them? The likelihood is that if you're tempted to, if you had another $600,000 or $250,000 in your bank account, the likelihood is that you probably would give a little bit more, or decide to give in the first instance. But people get so accustomed to government doing it. It's a government's job to take care of people, that they forget that that's not the role of government. That's just force. That's just coercion. That's just stealing. That really what matters in the genuine charity sense of the word is what a person does out of the goodness of his own heart. When he writes a check out himself or puts on his credit card himself, that's what charity is all about. It's not about forcing people or stealing from people and claiming the government's a good person. It's going to heaven, the government heaven, boy, it's just done such good things. Well, that's ridiculous. And so when we talk about this libertarian world, we've got to always focus on the unseen consequences of what's going on here. So in a libertarian world, people are free to engage in economic enterprise, right? Without government intrusion, obstruction, licensing laws, permit restrictions, all this junk that interferes with enterprise. You see, that word free enterprise, it didn't mean free like, hey, like a free concert, you get in without having to pay any money. That's not what it meant. It meant free of government control, because throughout history, people have suffered under an economic system where government controls, government manages the economy. And what was unique about America at one time was that it was free of government control. The economy was. There was no government management. You know how you hear the president's running for, I'm running for the manager-in-chief of the economy and the job creator-in-chief. I mean, hasn't that been the big economic issue? Who's going to create more jobs? Who's going to better manage the economy? Well, America once had a system where the government didn't manage the economy. The president didn't manage the economy. It was none of his business. That wasn't his job. They had a free enterprise system, a system that was free of government management, free of government control, free of government regulation. And that's, when a conservatives say, oh, well, let's talk about exceptionalism. America's exceptional. America's exceptional. Well, that's what made America exceptional. Now, there were exceptions to the principles of liberty. We all know that. There was slavery, there was tariffs, there was a lot of restrictions at the local level, state level. I mean, that's not surprising with respect to the restrictions, because people throughout history had grown up under a system of government control, government management. It was just it's ingrained in people. For centuries, governments have taken care of people, the paternalism of government dominance and control in economic affairs. And so what was exceptional about America was that on the national level, the federal government level, there was no management of the economy. It was the most unbelievable period in world history. And then you had sound money, like gold and silver coins, no paper money that the government could stimulate with or debase or inflate like they do today. And so these events, no income taxation, no control of enterprise, and sound money, open immigration. All these forces came together to produce an unbelievably prosperous society. Oh, and by the way, also the most charitable society in history. I mean, if you look at the period let's say from the end of the Civil War to about 1900, where they were building museums and opera houses, all this was voluntary. And it wasn't because of an income tax deduction. It was because the wealthy and to a certain extent the middle class were voluntarily donating their money to help out in these causes. And there was a tremendous amount of voluntary associations, including workers getting together and sharing, like an insurance pool. So it truly was an exceptional thing. I mean, the world's never seen anything like it. And of course, today, thanks to the status, we've now reverted back to the old centuries old concept of the government management of the economy. The drug war. There was no drug war in the 19th century. I mean, adults were treated like adults. I mean, you wanted to ingest a harmful substance, whether it was cocaine or marijuana or dope or booze or whatever. That was your own business. Now, there was organizations forming to try to dissuade people from this, Alcoholics Anonymous and so forth. But by and large, it was like you're on your own. You go through life as an adult, as a grown-up, instead of a little child adult where the government's there to take care of you, manage your retirement, manage your health care, and make a mess out of everything. I mean, look at the federal government. I mean, is there not a crisis everywhere? I mean, shouldn't this tell you something? There's a crisis in Social Security. We all know it's busted. Oh, sure, as the seniors say, oh, no, there's a fund, Jacob. I know there's a fund. Please tell me there's a fund. Well, I can't lie to you. There is no fund. They're just not. That as people were paying their Social Security taxes, the government spent the money over the last, umpteen years since it came into existence under the socialist fascist regime of Franklin Roosevelt. They took it, okay, and they spent it. That's just a fact of life. They had wars and imperial adventures to fund and welfarism, and they had all the drug war and all their favorite government programs. They had dictators to install into office, like in Iran and Guatemala and Chile and all over the world. Just recently Mubarak in Egypt, and then you got Jordan. They got to fund these people. And so, that's what the whole idea was, is that they were taking money and by force and funding this thing. And it's all turned out a mess. I mean, the whole war on terrorism, it's rooted in the government's foreign policy. All the things it's been doing in the Middle East after the fall of the Berlin Wall. They went out and started poking hornets' nests over there, and all the war on terrorism, and they all did tell us, oh, this is to keep you safe. We've kept you safe. And the average public school person who defers to authority, is very submissive and obedient, he goes right along with it. Thanking the troops for keeping us safe. Thank you for your service in Iraq. Thank you for your service in Afghanistan. Oh, I'm so grateful for you keeping me safe. I mean, it's part of this delusionary way of life, because it's a mess in Iraq. It's an absolute, it's a horror story. And it's the same thing in Afghanistan. They got a crooked, corrupt, dictatorial regime there that the U.S. is propping up. I mean, this is what it's done. Look at Libya. They go in there and they say, oh, we want to help. We want to help. We want to oust a dictator. What? I mean, you've got the country in chaos now, and of course you got a U.S. ambassador that was killed there, and of course U.S. officials say, well, gosh, we don't understand why people are mad at us. We went in there and bombed them for their own good. And of course there's now the possibility of interventionism in Mali, in Africa. Who the heck knows where that is? And why? Because they're saying, well, the Islamic radicals have taken control of that portion of the country, the northern portion of the country. Well, guess where those radicals came from? They came from Libya with their weaponry that they took from Gaddafi's warehouses and their gun armories before he got captured and killed. So, I mean, so you've got the U.S. intervention producing this weird, like bizarre result, and now they're using that bizarre result to say, well, we may have to intervene there too. I mean, the whole thing's a horror story. The whole thing's a mess. The whole thing, the national security state, the warfare state, let's keep Americans afraid. Oh, what about the financial crisis? You know, they've got, spending $1 trillion more than what they're spending, than what they're bringing in. I mean, how does a nation go on? Ask the Greeks what happens when you do that. And yet, every time you've got a government program, you've got the status screaming about getting rid of it or even slightly reducing it. I mean, you see it in this FEMA thing where they're saying, oh, Romney wants to abolish FEMA. Oh, my gosh, just think if all those poor people wouldn't get their money from FEMA. All right, then you talk about Social Security and reducing it, let's say, 1/1,000,000%. Oh my gosh, if you did that, the old people would be starving in the streets. And then the old people, of course, are out there, screaming and yelling, saying, oh, we put it in, we got a right to take it out, And really what they're saying is, people that are now dead took our money, so now we want a system to continue where we take out the money from our children and our grandchildren, who, by the way, are struggling to start families, buy a home, and so forth, because of partly because the tax burden's so high. And you got health care. I mean, we all know what a crisis that is. Well, there's a common denominator here. It's all socialism or interventionism. The drug war, I mean, what a mess that is, right? Or imperialism. I mean, so in a word, it's all statism. And that's the root cause of America's problems. Now, you don't hear that debated between Romney and Obama, right? I mean, all you get is in this election, which for a libertarian has got to be the most boring thing I've ever had to live through. I mean, I don't know if y'all saw that video about that little girl, she's 4 years old, started crying and crying, and they asked her why'd she cry. It's really funny. You got to see it on YouTube. She says, I'm so sick and tired of hearing about Romney and Obama, and I don't want to hear about them anymore. And she's crying. And I think it was NPR. I think she had heard a program on NPR's thing, and so NPR sent her an apology and said, "We're so sorry. We're sick and tired of it too." I mean, like, who isn't sick and tired? Because it's the same old status nonsense. Regardless of which one of them prevails, they're running as manager of the economy, the job creator in chief, the assassin in chief. I mean, the U.S. government's now assassinating people, including Americans. And so, like, which one of them gets to have the kill list? Well, it's all rooted in foreign policy or domestic policy or the welfare state. And so they're operating within this paradigm, you see. It doesn't matter whether Romney's elected or Obama's elected, because the problem is not the person. The problem is the system under which they're operating, and it's a system of statism. Now, in the public schools, they ingrain into kids' minds that nothing's changed in America. It's the same system from 1787 to today. It's a free enterprise system, limited government, private property, And, well, it's just a lie. But that's the myth they have to inculcate. They have to inculcate in the American people that in 1933, when Franklin Roosevelt took office, that nothing revolutionary happened. That it was just a minor reform to save the free enterprise system. And that's what they teach them from the first grade. The New Deal saved free enterprise. So by the time they're adults, they just think it's the same system. I mean, you see it with kids, for example, growing up right now that are in college, that they grew up under post 9/11. They were like 8, 9, 10 years old. To them, it's perfectly normal that the government's going out assassinating people, kidnapping people, torturing people, and to them it's all freedom. You see, because in public school they teach you that you're free, that America's a free country. And so you've got all these adults that go to these sports events, and when the announcer says, oh, thank goodness that the empire's abroad and killing people and assassinating people, everybody cheers and yells, yeah, thank the troops for doing this for us. Because to them it's all freedom and it's all normal. Because that's the indoctrination. That's the value of government schooling. It molds the mind. I mean, you put somebody in a government institution for 12 years of their lives. I mean, how can they not have their minds molded? I mean, it's just a natural state of affairs. That's why there's public school systems in North Korea and Cuba and China and elsewhere, because governments want to have that compliant, subservient citizenry that doesn't question anything. Not at a fundamental level. Yeah, you can carp about the bureaucracies, you can carp about the mail delivery and so forth, but your mind doesn't permit you to challenge things at a fundamental level or question them. Even in when they're right in front of you, like in Iraq. I mean, we're all taught to believe that there's a paradise there. It's democracy. They're so harmonious and prosperous now because of the invasion. Well, it's a horror story. It's an absolute horror story in Iraq. But you see, it's a dictatorship. There's torture there. There's killing there on at least a weekly basis. I mean, nobody goes on vacation to Iraq. No American. Certainly, Congress doesn't have any of their little, junkets there. And the president flies in and flies right out. Doesn't spend the night there. It's a horror story. And that's what the troops have killed for. That's what the troops have died for, a horror story. Same thing in Afghanistan. And we were at the Future Freedom Foundation saying these things before they took place. That if you treat these things, terrorism, as a military problem, you're going to end up with a mess that's just so gigantic, and sure, here we are, Well, okay, where are we now? Well, we're here heading down a very bad road because we're headed toward more statism under Obama. I was going to say Romney or Obama. It doesn't matter. But we libertarians provide the hope out of this thing. And regardless of who's elected, the point is that ideas can influence an entire society. They can cause an entire society to shift philosophies regardless of those in office, because they cannot stand the weight of this gigantic shift in public opinion. And that's the power of ideas. This is why the Chinese shut down ideas, especially ideas on liberty, because they're too concerned. They've got a monopoly on power, just like the Republicans and Democrats have their little system over here that has a monopoly on power. And they don't want to lose that. And they know that if they let ideas be transmitted freely, that people will all of a sudden break through. And you reach a critical mass, and all of a sudden the whole system can come crashing down, like the Berlin Wall did, entirely peacefully. And that's the beauty of libertarianism, is that it brings this paradigm that's based on American heritage, the heritage of liberty, individual rights, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. And once you break through and you start seeing, oh, wow, this isn't freedom. The Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, socialism is not freedom. Interventionism, regulation, the drug war, not freedom. It's antithetical to freedom. A military empire, great big standing army, military bases everywhere, out of control federal spending. This is not freedom. But then all of a sudden you say, but is there a way out of this? Yeah, libertarianism. And so we provide the moral case, we provide the economic case, the financial case. We provide the overall case for getting out of the morass in which this country is situated. It's like quicksand, or, to mix metaphors, like cancer on the body politic, all this statism. And so what we need to do as libertarians is not fall for their little trap where they say, well, what's your plan for saving Social Security? What's your plan for saving health care and Medicare? And what's your plan for saving Afghanistan? And, we don't have plans to do those things. What we want is a free society. So we don't get mired down in their quicksand. We stand above. We look at this thing and we analyze it and we say, here's your way out. Dismantle these things. Repeal them. Get rid of them. Ditch them. That's your solution. And if people say, well, that's just too difficult, because they're like holding on to an anchor as they're sinking. And you're saying, let go of the anchor, let go of the anchor. And they, oh, no, I'm too attached to my anchor. I can't let go. And if I let go, I might not live, And, well, that's the way people are with statism. They honestly think that life would be impossible for them. That, they'd starve to death or they'd die of whatever, if there wasn't statism. Well, it's the exact opposite. This is the key to get us out of this morass. Libertarianism is. And so we've got to just, regardless of who's elected, just continue with our paradigm building. building the paradigm, finding libertarians, keep growing our numbers until we reach that critical mass that everything then just shifts. That's the show. Thanks so much for listening in, and look forward to seeing you. Oh, by the way, we've already posted 2 of our videos from our College Civil Liberties series, where Glenn Greenwald and Bruce Fine and I and Jack Hunter were presenting to on our West Coast tour, where we did 5 college campuses. We've already posted 2, the University of Washington at Seattle, University of Washington at Davis. This week we'll be posting the University of California at San Diego. So tune in, and thanks so much. Oh, tomorrow night we've got our Economic Liberty Lecture Series. That's Monday night. And tune in, live streaming. Of course, we'll be posting it on our website later on. That's the show. Thanks so much. Talk to you next week.